Okay, let's start this final session and roundtable on assessment. So we had a very interesting comment this morning from my director, Andreas Schleicher, saying that one of the big problems of education was actually the divorce between learning and assessment. And so that, in the case of creativity, we've just been talking about pedagogy that would support creativity in school. And so one of the questions for this roundtable is basically how can assessment help to, support it as well and reconcile, the learning and the assessment. So that's really one of the things that we found as part of the OECD work on creativity and critical thinking or creative thinking. It's really how, especially in the case of primary and secondary education, going from pedagogy to assessment was really one of the big difficulties. And we found that in the network of schools and teachers we've been working with, there was a lot of willingness, enthusiasm for actually changing the pedagogy, but much less so when it came to actually changing the assessments, and how the learning was actually measured, which is not the case in the case of higher education. So that's a bit encouraging, where we can see that there is much more willingness to actually change everything. But assessment is really important, to send signals because what we assess is really what we value, what at the end of the day, will be taught intentionally, not to let the students down. And so we have a great panel to discuss about that this afternoon, and from a variety of types of assessments, standardized, summative assessments to formative assessment, and how we can actually make things happen within schools. And so it's really my pleasure. I'm not going to do like a Bill this morning. You can watch the bios, but we have a great panel. So Todd Lubart, who is one of the big specialists on creativity and who has actually developed an assessment, a standardized assessment of creativity. Elodie Persem, who works for the French Ministry of Education, and she's going to tell us, what the French Ministry is doing about that. Mario Pesciantini, my colleague working on PISA, the PISA innovative domain, and on creative thinking in 2022, so this year, but that will come out in a few years' time. He will talk about that. And Richard Jones, who is the school principal or head teacher, I guess, the formal name at Princeton in England, and who is actually going to tell us what it means, in a school to support actually and assess creative thinking. So let's start with you, Elodie. So France has a national evaluation system, whereby students are being evaluated on math and French every year in grade 1, 2, and 6, if I remember well. And now there are some new initiatives to expand actually these types of assessments. So can you tell us about that, and to creativity in particular?
I will try. So I work more specifically for the evaluation directorate, and this directorate decided to create a specific unit on the evaluation of 21st century skills 2 years ago. So I'm in charge of this department, this very specific department called Accessibility, Innovation and Research. And I collaborate with researchers in France and in other countries to set up, build, or simply exchange assessments based on 21st century skills. So this is a global overview of our project. First of all, to build general framework, we compared all the international classifications we found to decide which competencies we were trying to assess. So you can see some little stars, and it means that we have already started to work on it. So let's focus on creativity. I'm going to present you very quickly 3 projects to develop evaluation around creativity. So the first one is a study. Initially, it was an international study conducted by the IEA to compare the presence of 21st century skills in the education policies and the curricula of different countries. But this study was cancelled because of the COVID crisis. But as we had started to work on it, we decided to continue on a national scale. So our goal was to analyze the presence of 21st century skills in French curricula between 4th grade to 9th grade. We really needed to have a comprehensive approach of all of these big questions. So a program counted the number of explicit references to the skills, and an expert group of teachers analyzed and identified the implicit references to the skills. And so let's take the example of creativity, of course, to give you some quick points of analysis. The word creativity doesn't appear much, and the word creation appears more, but in French it doesn't mean really something, because sometimes creation is used just to do something, so it's not really linked to creativity. Moreover, creativity is never really defined in curricula. It only appears through 2 dimensions. Creativity is mostly defined through the ability to imagine, to use imagination to make an artistic production. So it therefore only appears on art-related curricula like literature, visual arts, and music. And the second dimension associated with creativity is innovation, and more specifically the ability to find a new solution in a complex situation. And it only appears in 2 curricula, in science and technology. So to be very quick, the conclusion was that creativity is rather poorly represented and defined in a very partial way, and not in a very transversal way. So this work was very interesting, and it was especially necessary before building an evaluation on creativity, because it raises some questions like, how can creativity be taught? How can it be assessed if it doesn't appear clearly in curricula? So we have done this work on all the 21st century skills, and we also look at the links between them. And we have only one good news. We have a lot of progress to do, but it was much better for other skills, fortunately. So the second example, it's a project on creativity and mathematics. So this one is conducted in collaboration with 3 universities, and Todd worked with us on this one. So it's a project to evaluate creativity in math using convergence and divergence measures. And the evaluation took place in September. We don't have the data yet. We look forward to the results. You can see on the screen one of the items. It's a symmetry exercise in which the student has to give the more original response possible. And we would like to be able to compare these results, the results of this test, with the results of the students in mathematics, in the national assessments. So it seems really interesting for us to question the link between knowledge and creativity. And the last one is a project to evaluate design thinking. I work with Jeppe Bonsgaard from Aarhus University in Denmark on this one, and I'm really lucky to work with him. It's really passionate. Jeppe has shared all of the items and also the coding platform in open source with us. And we try to use these items to have a summative evaluation of design thinking. We will evaluate the 4 dimensions you will see on the screen, and we want to compare the results of the test with the results of the students in the national assessment as well. We've made the experiments on May 2022, and we are currently coding the responses. So I can quickly show you some example of this of the items. We will find some elements of creativity associated with empathy or reasoning task sometimes. So it's brainstorming items. In this one, student has to give as many ideas as possible in 3 minutes, and he can see the other characters' proposals at the same time. So coding is much easier and simpler than it was in PISA, but it's also based on divergence criteria. You can see 2 other examples. Examples 2, it's an item in which the students must find a new design solution within some constraints, so we can move some elements to find the best solution. And the last example is a modeling item in which the students must construct an object within constraints 2, and this is an example of the coding platform. So this was a very quick overview of our work around creativity. As you can see, we don't have any data yet, but we hope to have some soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elodie. So we'll see now, how PISA is actually trying to do the same, perhaps, but on international level, so that it's comparative as well. I believe we don't have the data yet either, but we're really willing to see how this is actually working. So Mario, it's yours.
Yes. My slides, please.
Is coming.
Yeah. Yes, I have the difficult task of presenting our work in a few minutes. So I will be speaking fast, and I will be happy to
Just
get.
Just say less.
No, fast. I will be happy to take questions. It's perfectly fine if you didn't if you will not be able to understand every details. But first about the definitions, how we define creative thinking is the competence to engage productively in the generation, evaluation, and improvement of ideas that can result in original and effective solutions, advances in knowledge, and impactful expression of imagination. You can see in this definition there is a clear focus on the concept of ideation. So this is really how we define creative thinking as a small c form of creativity, the human universal capacity to generate ideas. And in terms of the purposes, there are like 3 distinct but overlapping purposes. The one of like finding solution to problems, the ones of like contributing, collaborate to knowledge creation, and finally having means and also confidence to express one's own inner world. In terms of the test itself, there are essentially like 3 families of tasks: generate diverse ideas, generate creative ideas, and evaluate improved ideas. There are 3 facets of these general ideation skills. For the first one, generate diverse ideas is mostly referring to divergent thinking. So we are asking the students to come up with 2 or 3 different solutions to a problem, or 3 different stories or visual product. For generate creative ideas, we are asking to elaborate one single response. So this is more in the space of convergent thinking or like pure creation. And what we are mainly looking at is the originality of the student's idea. Evaluate and improve ideas, we are giving students with some kind of solutions or ideas, and we are asking them to identify weaknesses or potential for improvement in those ideas. And we take quite a well-defined stance on the fact that creative thinking is at least to some extent domain specific. We discussed it today, how it's essentially like it originates and it develops essentially through experience. And so we can expect that also the potential to demonstrate creative thinking will depend on the extent to which students have been exposed to some type of creative activities within or outside the school borders. And this is like integrated in the design of the test, for which we have like four domains. The first one is written expression, and we ask students mainly to come up with story ideas. For the visual expression domain, we have developed a very simple visual tools in which the students don't do free drawing, but do like drag and drop shapes or images and do idea association work to create their own visual design. And then two types of problem-solving activities. One that is mostly in the scientific world, and I would say initially we had the ambition of doing, we developed quite a few items on mathematics. These were ultimately rejected by the PISA countries, and most of the items that survived are in the engineering space. So creating, for example, a new idea for a bike, and the social problem solving, really like universal social problems coming out with solutions. This is an example of an item. It's not a real items, but it shows how they work in the for generate creative ideas in the written expression. What we do is to give some stimulus to the students, such as some images. In this case, there is a popular game with dice in which you have to create one story associating all these images. And we are asking the students, we are giving an explicit prompt to be original in their stories. And what we have seen when we tried this like prototype is that many students engaged successfully with the exercise, but the story they came out with were mostly about the same ideas of someone going around the world and leaving home to go to a different place. But few students were able like to make more complex ideas association. Of course, like it's what everybody wonders when I speak about this test, how are you going to code this? And that was like the very big part of the work. I give you two examples, one for the generate diverse ideas items. We have built, I mean, mostly Natalie was sitting down there, built like a massive document of like coding rubrics. And basically we like, all the responses are fully open, so they have to be coded by human. We didn't figure out a way of asking machines to do the work. And what the coders do are essentially, in the first step, is to evaluate whether the students are providing an appropriate response. So, and we have a very, very light requirement for appropriateness. It just has to be on task. Yeah, it has to respond to what we ask them to do. And in Generate Diverse Ideas, we provide to the raters categories of ideas that are sufficiently different, and with examples for each category, and they have to use this example to evaluate whether the 2-3 responses of the students are sufficiently different. For creative ideas, it was even harder because we had to define when a response was original or not. And for doing that, we collected hundreds of responses from students around the world on the items, and we have basically classified them in groups, in categories, in like, for example, on a problem of like what supermarket can do to avoid wasting food at the end of the day. We seen hundreds of responses, and we classified in 8 categories of possible ways of solving the problem. And what the readers have to do is to evaluate whether the student's response is one on these like most common categories. If it's not, it's going to be original. Then there is another rescue point. Some students provide a response that is in a common category, but they add some relevant details or nuances to the idea. Also, in this case, the response is considered to be original. What we are seeing also in the field trial is that we are able, with this coding rubric, to achieve a sufficient degree of inter-rater reliability. That means that 2 random people coding the same responses come to the same conclusion. This is, so I got this question this morning, how can school use this test? I would say they cannot use this test because it's not designed for school, it's not designed for learning. What PISA is good at doing is to provide a snapshot. It's mostly work as a red alert. It tells people that their expectations are not really grounded in reality and they have to do more. This is what the purpose of PISA is, not for learning. And our items will still be like, most of them will be secret and remain secret in the future. So what we have been doing, this is a spin-off of PISA that we have been working on over the last years. We have created an online platform that is open source and 100% free, in which we have been developing assessment that are based on the same frameworks that we have developed for PISA, but on which we told ourselves that we should just think creatively and and escape, like liberate ourselves of all the constraints we have in PISA. So the idea is that there is a lot of time for like working on these problems, while in PISA it's very constrained. The work can be collaborative, the teacher can intervene. It's really designed for providing feedback at the level of the individual students and to guide instruction. So this is one application that we have developed in this platform that is called PILA in collaboration with a group of researchers in Switzerland. And essentially it's also about embedding creative thinking in specific domains. So in this application, the main focus is on computational thinking and programming. So students learn a lot of key concepts like repetition, algorithm creations, or like variables and functions. But they learn doing like a completely creative project. What they do is to start ideating their own game. They can make drawings for all the objects in the games, from the main sprite and all the scenarios. They take a photo, they upload into the computers, and then they animate their game and they make their own story. And we are embedding an assessment into that. And we have other applications that we have been developing that tap into other 21st century competencies. So this was my introduction. You can find all that you need to know, or most that you need to know, in this publication. We have published it last month on the PISA assessment, and this is the link of the PILA project if you would like to participate. We have several schools engaged already, and it's all free and fun. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mario. So we have here, two examples of educational assessments, of creativity. There is a long tradition of standardized assessment for creativity that, psychologists have developed over a lot of decades, and actually Todd, you are one of those psychologists who did that. Can you tell us to what extent actually this, where do you locate, what we've just seen as part of this, history, and are there some tools which are more handy for teachers and schools that would actually allow to assess the creativity of students? So are the kind of traditional standardized assessments developed by psychologists actually usable in a school setting, and if yes, how, and how do you relate it to the kind of assignments, exams, etc., that teachers can also give their students?
Okay, yes, thanks. Well, happy to be here with all of you. Thanks for having me on this specific panel. And yes, I will try to give you the condensed version of about 100 years of work in less than 10 minutes. So I have to cover the first 90 years in the first minute. 95, yeah. First of all, I'd like to say that this is part of a larger field of research that personally, myself and our team in Paris and many colleagues around the world work on these days and since the past decades. And I associate that with a project we have called Homo Creativus, which is the 21st century version of Homo sapiens. Okay, and in terms of creative measurement tools, there are two main categories to draw at the beginning, which is, first, we could be interested in what we call creative accomplishment, which is that kids or adults actually did something in their life as an accomplishment, a real accomplishment. And we could have self-report, or we could have a portfolio of work that someone brings in. The other method is to focus on what we call creative potential. And for example, what we saw with Elodie with the DEP measures, or with Mario with the PISA measures, these are measures of creative potential because we're going to see what somebody could do. But it's a test. It's a request for performance on the spot, essentially, okay? And the other way to measure creative potential is to measure what we call the ingredients of creativity. So we could say you have more or less potential if you can show open-minded thinking, if you can show mental flexibility, if you can show various ingredients, if you can show risk-taking. These are ingredients for being creative. So first I'd like to illustrate the idea of creative potential, because often in schools we focus on creative potential, with a example, the EPUC battery, meaning Evaluation of Potential Creativity. It's available in various languages. And this is a battery we worked on and still work on, and we had the opportunity in the project that Stefan was running for several years it was used as a pre and post measure so that classroom teachers who would roll out creativity activities could see the impact of their activities. And in this battery, we measure creative potential by domain. So we have the graphic domain, the verbal domain, the social, the mathematical, the scientific, the musical domains, and the body movement domain. And we have two kinds of things to do in each domain. The first is what we call divergent exploratory thinking, divergent thinking. The example you see is what one child did with the banana form. You see the child made 4 drawings. In fact, the child made 10 drawings, but for the purpose of this example, I show you 4 of them. And it's norm reference tests, so we know in France, a child of that age with the banana tends to make however many drawings. So this child is average. For a 9-year-old child in France to make 10 drawings with the banana is average, okay? Now this is the reference normed use of a test, but in a classroom exercise or setting, you could use this kind of test to measure pre-post difference in raw performance of kids after some intervention. So you don't really need the reference norms to use it. The other task is what we call convergent integrative thinking, creative synthesis. So it's not exactly the same term of convergent that was mentioned in the PISA. Okay. So here, the converging operation is to take several shapes or things that we give and put them together in a creative synthesis. And you see the one drawing that a kid did, which got a high score, because they used many of our objects in unusual ways to form what the child calls the samurai warrior. The samurai warrior has a body made of a light bulb with a fish head made from a fish toy we gave, and the kind of spatula is the warrior's arm, and the warrior's sword is made of a carrot and a wood mannequin. So this is a kid in upper elementary school working for 10 minutes with the objects we give to create a synthesis in a new idea. Okay, so we have this kind of thing in different domains. Now, this is the kind of testing mode, okay? We have standardized items, we use them, we roll them out, we test kids, we can test a large number of kids, we have a scoring scheme in which teachers or researchers could be trained and score things. Now, the other way to do it in classrooms is that teachers would adopt a similar conceptual structure, and they could structure homework or test assessments to show they're putting value on creativity. They can attribute points in some scoring system. I can tell you how we attribute points. And they would illustrate the divergent exploratory and convergent integrative in their own subject matter. So in fact, we try to give teachers a support, like a guidance, how to construct your own mini test or how to construct your own mini assessment. And you could give kids feedback, so it could be a learning experience. I'm going to show an example, but in general, in divergent exploratory, we focus on the number of ideas because we consider fluency, the number of ideas, to be the driving force between, for divergence, And the more you produce, the more you have a chance that some idea is original. That's why fluency is so important to us. And in convergent synthesis, we focus essentially that how many of the things we gave did you put together? Did you transform their nature so you showed flexible thinking? And is your synthesis somewhat original statistically that other people didn't do it much? Okay? And so once you have that, you can actually, as a teacher, you can score the kids in the class against each other. And you can explain it. And the kids can score it themselves against each other. And they can learn how to be a good judge of their own ideas because they internalize. Okay. So here's an example, back to math. Of course, with the DEP, we have advanced math creativity problems that are structured by grade level with the knowledge that students have in math. It's a more advanced method, but in this example, you got to know how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. That's all you need to know. And we offer them a little calculator that calculates the sum. And so in divergence, you have to make as many things that get to 7 in the time we give. Now, we have we call dynamic testing mode, in which the computer can capture what your ideas are. Someday, the computer will detect your strategy and give you some hints of how to go further once you run dry and have no more ideas. So this is a kind of zone of proximal development type of testing mode, but you can just use it as normal testing and rate a kid against other kids. It was used in the OECD in the SIRI project. Here is convergent math. You have to use all the numbers at least once, and you have to get to 1, okay? And you have to use at least 2 operators. And so you produce 1 synthesis, numerical, and we score you for the rare combination of numbers and of operators. So if you do the most standard thing, you do 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, minus, 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 and you get to 1. This is a very boring solution, very common, and you use plus and minus, and that's it. But we also score for short answers, because short is beautiful, according to mathematicians in this task. Okay. And so that's it. That's a brief overview. By the way, if you're interested, we have a book chapter that did not come out yet that I'm happy to share with you, not even hot off the press. And it is the brief history of creativity assessment from the beginning of time till today. It's like 20 pages.
Oh, I hope you do antiquity.
We go back to like 1900.
Oh, short history then. So, Richard, so we've had some examples of what can be done at the system level, what could possibly be used, within schools, but even what Todd has shown us, even so, I must say that as part of our project, many of the students liked it. And sometimes, so I visited the school actually, and one of the students were coming by because she had some new ideas since the time she took the test. So she wanted to add some more, However, perhaps it is far from some of the constraints of, what school has to do, what the parents expect, what the teachers want in terms of, So you run a school that has a very strong emphasis on creative thinking. And so how do you assess, how do you know that students are making progress on that? How do you support the teachers to actually do it, basically? And what do you think, how can we actually make it more practical and more tangible in a school setting?
Thank you, Stefan.
So, press the button.
Thank you. Just to set expectations, I don't have an answer to the question in terms of how we assess creative thinking, and I'm slightly reassured by that in terms of my colleagues on the panel here not yet necessarily having the data in the the evidence to suggest that these different approaches work, and that's still work in progress at the moment. To give some context to Bryanston and the school that I work at, we are lucky that we do have a reputation for creativity and for creative thinking, and I can't really take the sort of the I can't, that was already in place before I came, so I can't take all the credit for that. But just to give you an overview of how we work as a school, and I think what helps us with that reputation, our whole education approach is based around something called the Dalton Plan. The Dalton Plan is very much a focus on independence and our students taking ownership and trying to give them some agency and empowerment around their work. And that's a word, that agency and empowerment are two words that I've heard used a lot today when it comes to creative thinking. So how that works in practice, what it means is this focus on independence, we give our pupils space and we give them self-directed study time. So when they join us at the age of 13, 10% of their timetable is self-directed study. They're not in front of a classroom teacher. I can imagine that for a school to bring that in now is actually very difficult. I think there's a real fear in schools of giving pupils time. I think schools are worried. If we don't know what they're doing all of the time, then they must be up to, then that's going to be bad. They're going to be up to no good if we don't give them space and time. But we do. We give them that time, and as they go through the school, the amount of self-directed study time that they have increases and increases and increases. And to the point where they get to sixth form, they have if they're doing the traditional A-level route in England, about 40% of their timetable will be self-directed study time. We believe that when they get to that point, they know how to use it because they've had 3 years to build up to it. And one of our measures of success as a school is around what we call value added. It's the difference between their benchmark testing and their predicted grade when they joined us and what they finish with. And our value added as a school has always been incredibly strong. And that for us provides us with evidence that our approach is one that works, and it comes to fruition when they get to sixth form. We've built on that now in terms of what we do with our pupils when they join in year 9, and we've now put built into our curriculum, our teaching for our year 9s, 1 lesson per week on something we call it the D method, because we call that year 9 group, our D group. They have a lesson a week in the first term where they are learning about what it means to be an independent learner, what it means to manage your own time, how you allocate time throughout your week, and how you make the most of that time. In the second term, we allow them then to work on an independent project. Now, that can be an essay, or it can be something where they have to come up with their own artifact, they have to design something, and they have to talk about it and present on that. And then finally, in the third term, in that first year with us, they do a collaborative project with a group, and they work together. So I think for me, again, something that's been mentioned a lot today is this idea of deep thinking, deep learning. And again, I'm not sure our system, certainly in England, is set up for deep thinking at all. So by embedding this into our teaching in our first year that the pupils are with us, I believe it gives them a really strong foundation in which to then build on in terms of what it means to become a deep thinker and question deeply. So that's a little bit about our approach as a school and why I think we have a reputation as being a creative school and a big focus on creative thinking. As I said at the beginning, it's very hard to assess the benefit of that and measure what is working and what isn't necessarily. I should say all of that is underpinned by a system whereby each pupil has one individual tutor. So that tutor is like a coach or a mentor. They're the person that helps facilitate and manage their time and make sure that they're using it appropriately. And that's when we're working with teenagers, they need that guidance. They've got to have that all the way through. I guess I'm going to throw a bit of a curveball here and maybe say, do we need to be careful that we don't become too obsessed with assessing creative thinking? If we do we run the risk of creating a system where you can pass or fail with creative thinking? And that then surely goes against everything that we're trying to do. If creative thinking is about taking risks, there's no fear of failure. We can think outside of the box. So I would just as someone working in a school, I'd be slightly concerned that we don't get too focused on assessing. I think that's important. And just sat here thinking today about, for me actually, what's possibly more important is I think we all in this room firmly believe that creative thinking is essential. So how I'm thinking around, well, how do we, as a head, do I go about making sure that I create an environment in my school that facilitates creative thinking? And we've talked a lot about the link between creative thinking and well-being. Well, if our children feel that they have psychological safety in the environment that they're in, then that is going to allow them to have the confidence to think outside the box, take risks, come up with things that might be completely bonkers that other children might laugh at. But if we've created the environment where they are psychologically safe and feel they can be themselves and do that, then I'm confident that creative thinking will come about as a byproduct of it. So for me, I think that is something we can measure. We can measure psychological safety in schools. We can do surveys with pupils around, do they feel that they can be safe, that they can speak openly, that they are safe. And so I think that's something that we can do. Again, at Bryanston, we don't have a uniform, for example. We don't make everybody dress the same. They have a dress code, they can express themselves. We have a big focus on the individual. And all of that, I hope, does create that psychological safety. So that's about creating the environment and measuring whether or not we have an environment that we think will allow creative thinking. And then can we measure the outputs? So what do we think are relevant measurements when they come to leave our school? And we heard earlier about some of the most highly innovative industries that are out there, engineering and computing, the arts. So as a school, should we be measuring how many of our pupils go into those types of industries? And if they're going into highly innovative industries, does that suggest that actually they're doing that because we've played some part in terms of the environment and the culture that we've created at our school? So I think that's certainly something that I'm interested in. I really like the idea of the digital learner profile. So again, a pupil going on a journey through the school where they are responsible, again, giving them that ownership of creating a learner profile where they have to evidence themselves projects that they've led on, independent study, where they have solved problems that have come about, where they have created their own school group or society that's created change in a school environment. And that, I think, is a measurement that we could use. So, in summary, I guess for me, it's been enlightening today to listen to so many experts on this field. But I think as a head teacher, I'm interested in how we create the environment that will allow the pupils to have the confidence to think creatively. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. So are there questions for our panelists? I have a few, but I'd like to give you the possibility. Bill, go ahead.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, all of you. I'm just wondering whether a slight language shift would help us here. I really empathise with your concern, Richard, that you might unintendedly cement failure rather than celebrate a growth mindset, for example. We've been seeking to avoid the word measure or assess, and wherever possible, it's not always possible, talk about evidencing the progress of. And in our, we've done a year of research projects with teachers last year. That produces quite an interesting shift in the reaction from colleagues. So I offered that as one thought. The second is the minute you, and I think all of you were evidencing this, rely on one test, it's quite tricky. So if you can be multimodal and encourage assessment literacy, so you've got 2 or 3 different, almost a triangulation. And the third thing is if you can encourage a different rhythm, a different approach, so that your default is to approach the pupil. So you might call that a self-report, or you might just want to know what it's looking and feeling like from the pupil's point of view. That's interesting. That immediately means you have to put everything you're doing into student language. Maybe I can, maybe, you know, there's a whole debate about whether there's work or not. But the most important thing is getting teachers and non-teachers moderating products and processes where possible, a bit like Todd was saying. And that is fantastic professional learning. So it's kind of win, 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 win. Because you end up not talking about, is that a, whatever you want to call it, but wow, teaching it in that way, so you start talking about pedagogy, as Michael was suggesting, teaching it in that way is a more precise, more routine, more rigorous way of doing it.
I'll just add briefly to what Bill said there. I think that it's a really good provocation, Richard, because I think we've got ourselves in an assessment cul-de-sac, which is about league tables and external reporting, etc., etc. I think if we went back to a model where pedagogy and assessment were inextricably linked as part of the same process, and we thought about assessment as assessment for learning and assessment for progression, and we talk about strengths and yet to be strengths in the work we do. In a similar way, we're trying to kind of break that cycle of failure. But I think you're right to sound a warning about the way assessment is at the moment and the way it pushes kids into the failures and the non-failures. And I think we can do much better, and we can use assessment much more effectively to support learning. So.
Okay, so I'll take my privilege as chair to comment as well. In fact, I think, Richard, you've provided a few possibilities to assess, when I think that this idea of digital learner profile and having a portfolio allows a lot of possibilities in terms of reflecting on progress, but also what you've talked about, independent projects, why not have assignment that would actually allow people to demonstrate some aspects of this creativity and do it in an intentional way. One question I had for you is, I take the point on assessment. However, do you continue to assess mathematics and physics, and don't you fear that it's going to lead to this failure culture and that they will end up disliking physics and mathematics and English?
If you speak to half of my pupils, they'll tell you they don't like maths and they don't like physics because they're not good at it, and because they've been told they're not good at it. Yeah, and I think that again, something that possibly we haven't spoken about today is the importance of creative thinking, but we've got to have the foundation blocks underneath that. We've still got to have the academic discipline, the academic rigour, the focus on numeracy, the focus on literacy, because, and something I was talking to people about at lunchtime, if you go straight to project work, you can suddenly overload pupils as well. So we've got to remember that we've got to have those foundations, strong foundations on which to build, and where I think the creative thinking will come in the project work and the independent study. You can't just throw these things at children and expect them to react to them straight away. It takes time to build up the skill set to be able to do it properly.
Do you think that it takes time? Do you think it takes time to build it because people are not used to it, or do you think that in fact, it would be possible to build all these things at the same time, which ultimately probably is, what you would want to see, that you of course you have some ways of acquiring this thing and you need the rigor and the discipline to do it, but why not do it while you are also developing, your creativity and be able to express yourself?
Yeah, no, I agree. No, I agree. It can go hand in hand, absolutely. But that's why I think it's fascinating, this idea that as we get older, we get less creative. And we heard at the beginning, 15-year-olds report lower creativity than 10-year-olds. And one of the things I do when I go and speak to junior schools, and I do a talk about creativity, and I ask them all to put their hands up if they think they're a creative individual. And the younger ones will put their hands up and the older ones don't. And then I'll get out a paperclip and say, what is it? It's a paperclip. Right, what else can we use it for? And then we'll put their hands up and they'll go, we can use it to pick locks, or we can use it as a hair clip. And they come up with all these brilliant answers. And at the end of it, you go, you've just been thinking creatively. You've been giving me all these different uses for these things. And they're going, oh, wow. Yeah, okay, I get that. And it's really simple and effective to do. But why is it teenagers become, they become less creative? Is it because as we go through school, we get more assessment, more formal assessment, we get into exams, there's less opportunity for that creative work, for that independence? As I said, is it because as we get older, teenage years are really difficult and people are more conscious of who they are and what they're saying amongst their peers? And people are far less willing to take risks at that age. And actually, as schools, as I've said, we don't really encourage them to do so. Actually, we think when they get to that age, we've got to tighten things up because we're worried they're going to do something wrong. So there's lots to unpack there.
Mario, I have a question for you on originality. So how do you measure originality in an international context when something which can be very common in France could be very original in Thailand and vice versa?
Yeah, as I said, we have a frequency-based definition of originality. It's based on responses from samples of students from many countries. It was originally the first version of the rubrics was based on samples of students from 8 countries. Then we ran the field trial, so we collected responses from all the countries, and we saw what is common and what is not across the countries. For most of these items, and then it depends also on the domains, we see common patterns in the sense of some emerging stories and solutions coming out more frequently than others. Then when the data will be out, they will be, so this global benchmark is just an average across the world. When the data came out, there will be nothing like stopping researchers or interested people to do like local measures. For example, in which your criteria, your reference criteria to define what is common and what is not, is just based on the students in your own country. This is analysis we can do, but one of the nice things of PISA is that the data will be available. There will be lots of artifacts, lots of responses, lots of stories, and I think that the best research will be the one coming out from like national and local researchers who will be able to get inside the head of the students much better than we can do from here.
Thank you. Elodie, what do you think France, wants to gain from, the kind of evaluation of all these different skills in addition to what is why does the ministry engage in such endeavor?
As you have seen on the first studies, analysis of our curricula isn't really linked to this 21st century skills. So we have a lot of work to do on this field. I mean, it's just the beginning, but it's huge. And I forgot the beginning of your question.
Yeah, what
Oh, yes, I remember.
Oh, okay.
But sometimes assessments can have a quick impact on what is doing in classroom. When we add the results of PISA, each time it engage some debates and exchange. And we really need to have this to improve the construction of our educational policy and curricula. It's really necessary.
Go ahead.
I've got a question, I think, for all of you around this business of creativity and mathematics. For Elodie, you had 2 ways of writing about creativity in mathematics, and then in the next bullet point it said mathematical creativity. And I wondered, was there any difference between creativity in mathematics and the measurement or the practice of mathematical creativity? While you think about that, can I just go to Todd, who also said, kids learn to be a good judge of their own ideas. Quote Todd, that's what you said. Kids learn to be a good judge of their own ideas. And that was that beautiful assessment where you allowed them to assess their own creativity, their own level of creativity. Then in the same breath, well, later on we heard the amazing Richard, wonderful presentation, saying mathematics, the kids get to know they're not good at it. Is that because they're not taught in a way that works for them to know how to do maths and to be a mathematician? You said that they're taught or they feel they're not good at it. Is it because they've been taught in a particular way? So, what does teaching mathematics creatively look like? And so that it's total inclusion, because I haven't forgotten you, Mario. What's the question you'd like us to ask about that brings those? This is a creative question for you to construct. What connects those questions to your work? Do you like that?
Okay. Thank you very much, Pam. So now, of timekeeper as well, I will ask the panelists to answer very quickly and be sharp. And Todd, let's start with you.
Okay. Creativity in mathematics is of great interest just because the math domain is seen as such a low creativity domain. Therefore, it's a real challenge among the challenges. And it's also a kind of, it's got a precision to it in math. And so you can illustrate well to students the idea of creativity in a task, in a domain where they think it has perhaps no spot. And they can discover what it means, and they can then compare what they produce to what other kids produce, thereby learning the social, let's say, kind of the universe of what people in the class did, and suddenly they realize, many of them, that what they thought was their original idea, almost all the class did, okay? Thereby causing them great gains to do better next time. So there is a developmental possibility to be creative, often by confronting what you did with what others have done, because it can be creative for yourself, better than what you did before. But most creativity that people are interested in has a social referenced nature. And so this is part of the whole cycle of assessment, self-learning. I pass it on because there's only a few minutes left.
Yes, in fact, maybe it's a question for you because it's much your domains in mine, but I don't see really a difference between, you said creativity in mathematics and yes. Yes. I hope there is no difference, in fact, because as Todd said just before, mathematics is rarely associated to creativity. So if we can link these two aspects, it will be great. So.
Thank you, Richard.
I think we heard a really good example in the previous discussion around maths and dance. So again, it's if you are teaching a lower ability math set, for them to be sat there in the classroom, surrounded by people that they know they're in the lower set with, isn't particularly inspiring, and they're not enjoying the subject. How can we be creative with how we teach them about maths and mathematical concepts? And again, like I say, we talked about dance. We're lucky to have horses on our site at Bryanston, and again, well, actually, let's go down to the equestrian centre and think about the volume of the food that we're giving the horses and how much they need per day, and how can we put mathematical concepts into that context. And I'm pretty confident you'd get positive outcomes if you started thinking creatively with that. But as a head, you've got to empower the staff to go and do that, because most heads would look at that and go, what on earth? Why are they going out the classroom? No learning can happen out the classroom, surely. So it's just that mindset, and it's empowering people to do it and giving them the opportunities to go and do it.
Yeah, I also think that mathematics is a great case and subject to speak about creative thinking because, I mean, I mentioned briefly in my presentation the fact that in the scientific problem-solving domain, we were not able to get into the piece of test any mathematics question because there was this big, to me, misconception that that once you require knowledge, then it's no longer creativity, and so we were not able to write any creative thinking question in mathematics that didn't connect or require some level of knowledge of mathematics. And this is something that we need to communicate. This is normal. It's important. It's not there is not a dichotomy between being creative, being divergent, and knowing about a subject matter. And in terms of how we design assessment for mathematical creativity or creativity in mathematics, I think it's rather understood or known that. It's mostly about the designing and finding out questions that have multiple responses. So in which there is not one exact way of solving the problem, and this works in a summative context like PISA, but it works even better in a formative context, like the type of mathematics teachings that have been more empowering, especially for breaking this feeling of or this self-conception of not being able to. Invention activities in which you ask your students to come out with a method before you explain what is the right solution to the problem, and that works also not just because at the end of the experience the students get a much deeper understanding of the matter, even for complex things like variability in the data, but also because it creates what you were talking about, Richard, this environment in which everybody is allowed to come out with a solution and try out whether it works or not. And there is this mutual recognition of efforts and construction. So it helps to create the mindset at the individual level, but also at the classroom level.
Thank you very much. So we are reaching the end of this roundtable. Assessment, I believe, will remain one of the topics we have to talk about. There will be some assessments, as we have heard. It will become more common, and the question is, how do we actually manage to change them or not? Within classrooms and within schools. So, thank you very much to our panelists. And before closing the meeting, I want to give the floor to Bill for the final words.
Thank you. 3 thank yous. Thank you so much for you as delegates who've come, especially if you've come a long way. We really, really appreciate that. Thank you for speakers and panelists. We really appreciate that, again, in inverse proportion to the distance you've travelled. It's been absolutely terrific being in Paris, and this is our third, what am I talking about? It's the end of a long day. It's our first joint summit with, they seem to be going on forever now. It's our first joint summit with our friends at the OECD. Thank you to them and all the staff here at OECD and GEOCT who've made this happen. Lots of presentations, lots of materials. We'll make sure they're all available to you, and we'll keep in touch, and we hope very much you want to keep in touch with us. Thank you, Stefan, very much.